I've lived through a lot of trade wars dressed up as strategy. The pattern is familiar. First, you get the tariffs, then you get the retaliation, and somewhere in the middle, you get the bailout. This time, the scale is striking. Trump has unveiled a $12 billion assistance package for farmers hit by his own trade policies. Payments described as bridge support funded from tariff revenue and the Commodity Credit Corporation. The administration calls it a way to give farmers certainty after years of price pressure, export disruptions, and inflation. But in finance, whenever income from one pocket is needed just to keep another pocket afloat, you have to ask whether the underlying model is working or whether you're just shifting losses around the system. Listen closely to how the money is being described. Officials talk about one-time or bridge payments to crop growers and cattle producers designed to tide them over as better trade deals are negotiated and markets adjust. They say only a small portion of hundreds of billions in tariff revenue is being used. That's the language of temporary relief. But the realities on the ground, boycotts from key buyers abroad, lower export demand, higher input costs, and years of weak margins look anything but temporary to a farmer deciding whether to plant more acreage next season. When a policy needs recurring infusions of cash to keep its core supporters from breaking, you're not stabilizing a system. You're subsidizing its pain. At the same White House roundtable where the bailout was announced, farmers complained about cheap foreign rice undercutting domestic producers and fertilizer imports squeezing us suppliers. Trump's answer was blunt. Other countries are cheating, and tariffs could follow. He singled out Indian rice, hinted at duties on imports from Thailand and China, and suggested Canadian fertilizer could face severe tariffs to support domestic production. This is how a trade war evolves. First, broad tariffs justified by national security. Then sector-specific duties justified by dumping claims, each generating new winners and losers, and each creating another group lining up for protection or support. The administration isn't just swinging tariffs, it's also turning to the antitrust playbook. In a separate move, Trump signed an executive order directing the Justice Department and Federal Trade Commission to investigate whether anti-competitive practices in foreign-controlled firms are driving up food costs and threatening national security. The order frames the food supply chain as a potential national security vulnerability and explicitly links corporate behavior, especially by foreign-owned companies, to higher living costs for Americans. When a government simultaneously taxes imports, bails out producers, and launches antitrust probes into parts of the same chain, it's not just adjusting incentives, it's trying to micromanage the entire ecosystem from field to supermarket shelf. For investors, this trifecta, tariffs, subsidies, and investigations, creates a complicated risk map. On one side, U.S. farmers get short-term relief and the promise of more support if foreign competition bites too hard. On another, foreign exporters face the threat of new duties and potential loss of access, especially from countries like India and Canada, whose agricultural products are under direct scrutiny. On a third, large players in food processing, distribution, and retail now have to worry about being painted as pricey fixers or national security risks if margins rise too high or if ownership structures look too global for Washington's taste. Each group is being told a slightly different story, but they all share one thing: more policy risk than they had a year ago. The average household doesn't follow commodity charts or tariff schedules, it follows receipts. Grocery bills, beef prices, and the cost of basic staples like rice form the daily scoreboard of economic policy. Trump's team knows this. That's why the bailout is being marketed not just as farm relief, but as a step to keep food affordable, while cheaters abroad are confronted and anti-competitive behavior at home is investigated. The narrative is simple. Tariffs defend America, bailouts protect farmers, antitrust probes protect shoppers. But if tariffs push up input costs faster than bailouts and investigations can offset them, the consumer still ends up paying, just in a more complicated way. You can think of this as a three-layered tax on trust. First, tariffs are a tax on cross-border supply chains, raising costs somewhere between the dock and the dinner plate. Second, bailouts financed by tariff revenue are a tax on credibility. They quietly admit that policy has damaged a core constituency, but they try to fix it without changing the policy. Third, aggressive investigations, while sometimes necessary, can become a tax on investment appetite if companies start to feel they are political targets rather than regulated businesses. When all three show up at once, capital begins to doubt whether the rules are stable or just instruments in a permanent campaign. Long-term investors will ask three questions. First, is this $12 billion package truly a one-off, or the beginning of a recurring farm support cycle tied to tariff strategy? Second, will new tariffs on rice, fertilizer, and other food-related imports become entrenched, turning what is being sold as pressure into a semi-permanent cost structure? Third, will the food supply chain probes end with narrow enforcement against clear abuses, or will they expand into a broader regulatory squeeze on scale and foreign capital in us agriculture and retail? The answers will shape everything from fertilizer stocks and grain shippers to big box grocers and meat packers. From a purely economic perspective, there are two paths this can take. In the optimistic path, tariffs are used selectively and temporarily to secure better trade terms. The bailout helps farmers bridge to new markets. Antitrust probes clean up genuine abuses without crushing efficiency. And grocery price inflation cools as supply chains restructure. In that world, today's pain buys tomorrow's resilience. In the pessimistic path, tariffs proliferate, retaliation deepens, bailouts become recurring, and investigations inject fear into investment, all while structural costs stay high. In that world, you've taxed stability more than you've taxed cheating, and families feel it every week at checkout. As a cautious investor, the only sensible approach is to acknowledge the political logic but invest based on the economic math. Tariffs funded the bailout. That means the trade war is already expensive enough that its architects have had to borrow from one part of the economy to keep another part from breaking. New food-focused tariffs will add more strain to a system where price sensitivity is extremely high. And a sweeping probe into food supply competition will either expose real rot or create a chilling effect on scale and efficiency, both outcomes that will force valuation adjustments. Policymakers will talk about patriotism, fairness, and protecting rural America. Markets will quietly track something else, whether this web of tariffs, subsidies, and investigations leads to sustainable margins or just more volatility hidden under patriotic language. Every dollar of new bailout money, every hint of another tariff on a staple, every subpoena in the food chain probe becomes another data point in that equation. Because in the end, there's a hard truth about trade wars and food. You can't tariff your way out of basic arithmetic. Somebody always pays. The open question, the one this $12 billion package is quietly answering, is who pays first, who pays last, and who pays the most.